we're going to be doing animating today. So we've learned how to model things. We've learned how to add textures and stuff. Now I want to, walk through how do we move these things around and actually make an animation. So if you want to follow along right now in Blender, be my guest. But if you prefer to just watch, that's also fine too. So I'm going to go ahead and just hide everything and add in a Suzanne. She'll be my little test monkey. And the way that we animate inside of Blender is through keyframes. So who here's used keyframes before? Probably most of you. So keyframes, if you're not familiar, it's basically just telling your software to do something at a specific time. Think of it like a dentist appointment. Like you have to be at this place at this time. Doesn't matter what you're doing any other time, but as long as you're there at that time, we're good. So if I were to set a keyframe for Suzanne on frame 1, I'm going to do this really fast just to show you the basic overview, and then we'll get into the actual, what buttons do you press later on. If I were to set a keyframe for Suzanne here on frame 1, and then set a keyframe for Suzanne over here on frame 84, if I play this, it's now going to do what is called interpolation between those two keyframes. And it just takes the shortest path between the two. So instead of traditional animation where we are going frame by frame and drawing every single frame, which is its own art form and respectable and still done in many ways, this is just a different way of animating where you're just kind of getting the main poses. And then the software is just using math to, like I said, interpolate or to transition between them. So you really just have to set like the main elements, the key frames, and Blender kind of does the rest for you, which is pretty nice. It makes it easier to animate. So you can animate position. You can animate things like rotation. If I wanted Suzanne to do a flip, what I could do is I could set a rotation keyframe, and then when she gets over here, rotate her 360 degrees, add another rotation keyframe, and then she does a flip and she moves. So it's pretty easy to get some sort of movement, some sort of activity using just a couple of keyframes and letting Blender do the rest for you. You can keyframe the scale. So let's say I wanted Suzanne to get bigger over time. I could set a keyframe for the scale of Suzanne, and then over here, scale her up, add another keyframe, and now she's doing all three. She's moving, she's flipping, and she's getting bigger. So that is the concept of keyframes. You're setting an appointment. We're saying, Suzanne, whenever you're on frame 1, you have to be at this place, at this scale, using this rotation. On frame 48, you have to be this scale, this position, this rotation, and Blender is going to calculate what she does in between the two. What's next? We have to talk about the different types of interpolation. So in Blender, there's 3 different types, and 3 different ways for Suzanne to get from one place to the next. So if you watch this, it might be a little bit hard to notice, but she is actually starting off slow, speeding up, and then slowing down to a stop. Might be more obvious if I make this shorter. Something like that. So she is doing what's called in Blender Bezier interpolation. You may know it as easy easing or slow in, slow out. It's one of the 12 principles of animation that we talk about in intro. And it's basically the idea that most things don't start moving at the speed that they're going to move at, and they don't stop all of a sudden, right? Like, unless you're some drivers in Nashville, cars typically, if they're at a stoplight, the stoplight turns green, they slowly speed up, and then they're at their, I think it's called terminal velocity is gravity. They're at the main speed that they're going to go, and then when they see another stoplight, they slow down to a stop, right? They don't go from 0 to 60, all of a sudden. The default interpolation, the default blending between keyframes in Blender is the same way. It's going to start slow, speed up, and then slow down to a gradual stop. And it just gives things more of like a natural feel. But not everything moves this way. Some things maybe that are more mechanical, picture like a conveyor belt stopping and starting all of a sudden. Things that move kind of more robotically. You want to have a consistent speed the whole time. You want them to be more linear. And so in Blender, that's called a linear interpolation. And let me actually switch to, this is called the graph editor. This is just a different way of looking at keyframes. We'll get more into this next week. So if this look overwhelms you, don't worry about it. But this is just another way of viewing the type of interpolation that we have here. So left to right is still time, right? It's still moving the timeline across the animation. Up and down is her position, right? So we can see that the slope changes over time. And at the beginning and the end, the slope is more gradual. And then in the middle, the slope is steep. So the steeper the slope, the faster that Suzanne is going to go. So if we watch this, starts off slow, speeds up in the middle, that steep slope, and then slows down to a stop. If I were to change this to that linear interpolation I was talking about, you'll see the graph changes and it's just a straight line. So there's no easing in and easing out of it. She just moves at the same speed the whole time. So again, this is good for things that start and stopped moving pretty abruptly. Okay, and the last type of interpolation we're going to look at is called constant. And that looks like this. And basically what this does is it just, if you take an intro with me, this is like hold interpolation inside of Photoshop, where it's just going to hold the keyframe until you get to the next one. So for the first 29 frames or whatever I have here of this animation, Suzanne is going to be at this location, rotation, scale. And then as soon as I get to frame 30, it's just going to cut and it's going to take on the new keyframes and use these values going forward. So there's basically just no blending at all between them. It just stays on this keyframe until I get to frame 30, and then it uses those keyframes. Something to note inside of Blender, if you're used to keyframes in other softwares, I hate that the plural is software. It messes me up every time. Blender doesn't auto keyframe. So let me delete this second set. If I want to animate Suzanne moving forward, right, and I go to, let's say, frame 36 in my timeline, and I move Suzanne forward, a lot of softwares would add a keyframe automatically, but in Blender, it's not going to finalize it until you manually add a new keyframe. So if I were to hit play right now, it would just go back to the last keyframe that I had added, which is where Suzanne's in the middle. It didn't actually save the movement that I had done where I'd moved Suzanne out here because I didn't actually go in and add a keyframe. There's no keyframe symbol right there. The way that you've got this keyframe symbol here, this little diamond, tells us that there's a keyframe there. So if ever you are in a scene and your objects, sorry, I thought I spilled my coffee. Objects look fine, and then you go to either play it or render it and things have shifted a little bit, it's probably because you have keyframes somewhere that are overriding your manual changes because Blender is listening to those rather than what you've done. So in order for this change to stick, I've got to go in and manually add a keyframe so that she can actually move. And it's still set to constant interpolation. so that Suzanne can go in and actually move. Does that make sense? Does this kind of like overall concept make sense? I know it's probably super, super basic for some of y'all, but maybe newer for other people. Again, that was just like a bird's eye view of keyframes. I want to actually go in now, if I've covered everything, almost. In a second, we'll actually go in and do our in-class, and we'll put boots on the ground and actually make an animation. But let's just go over a couple of shortcuts first before we do that. This area that I've been down in for a while is something that we haven't touched since week 1. This is our timeline. So the shortcuts to the timeline are pretty intuitive, but just nice to go over. Spacebar is pause and play. And by default, it's just going to loop the animation. So whenever it gets to the end, it's just going to like go back to the beginning and keep looping. If you hit your right arrow key, that moves 1 frame to the right, and your left arrow key moves 1 frame to the left, or further back in your animation. Shift and left arrow moves your playhead or your marker all the way to the beginning of the animation, which is typically frame 1. In some softwares it's frame 0, but in Blender it's frame 1. I wish there was a unified consensus on that, but there's not. And then shift and right arrow moves your playhead to the very end of the animation. So we're going to be doing that a lot today, where I'll tell you to put a keyframe on frame 1. You can, of course, drag your playhead and try to get it onto frame 1, and that works fine, but it's not as easy as just going shift left arrow and locking it to frame 1.